logistics here. Who's going to take the lead on the Emery Grover, and what's the steps that we're going to go through here for the review?
I'll start off with just a very brief introduction. We, as you know, have been working all the way along, most recently focusing on 2 options, and a third was introduced, all associated with the existing Emery Grover building site. Option 1 is demolition and new construction on the site, which you've seen before. Option 2 is now called the Ad Reno, with the building directly behind it. And option 3 that you'll see tonight is the renovation of the existing building with a new addition coming off in an L shape. And that scheme was revised at suggestions that came out of the planning board review of the schemes, where accommodating sufficient car parking on the site was a very important aspect to them. So with that introduction, I think I will pass it over to Reese Schroeder, who will share his screen and walk you through that presentation.
So just to make sure everybody's clear, so Hank, Reese is going to go through the PowerPoint presentation and through that, and then at the end, we'll ask questions unless there's a way to work it through. And then after Reese, we do the questions, then we have some voting items. Is there any other major topics or things we need to manage in this discussion?
We will be introducing some very preliminary cost estimate numbers associated with these schemes, and that'll be one of the last slides.
Okay, so I'll leave it to you, Hank, and then Reese, and then as I said to everybody and people that are now, I can see other people joining. Please keep in mind to use the chat panel to put your questions in, and I'll tally them up, or at the end, if you can just wave your hand or hit the wave on the electronic bar for the meeting, and then we can manage questions. So bear with the delay of the process. All right, go ahead. Thanks. And Reese, you have it now, right?
Okay, I'm going to share my screen.
If people can go on mute, or I can certainly mute people, but if people could just mute their screens, their mics, that will help.
Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, I can see it definitely.
Okay, great. Well, I wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to update the building committee on our Emery Grover building study progress. And I'm trying to get to the next slide here. Okay. So we met with the planning board via Zoom video conference on April 7th to present the 2 options as recommended by this committee. We reviewed the tear down new construction option and the renovation addition option, which detailed zoning waivers required for each option. These are summarized as bullet points on the following slides for reference. The consensus of the planning board gave us the confidence to move forward with these 2 options if we could increase parking counts. We've worked on parking layouts and have revisited a 3rd option, which is a renovation addition option where the addition is rotated 90 degrees. We'll briefly review these 3 options tonight, as well as an update to project costs. That's the wrong slide. All right. Okay. So option 1 proposes to tear down and construct a new building serving the school administration. This option, as well as all options presented tonight, include relocation of the information technology department to the Emery Grover site. It also includes a 1,200 square foot conference center. The board was divided on whether to tear down and build a new building. By moving the new building closer to Highland Avenue, we're able to achieve 62 parking spaces. This is behind the building. This option requires a zoning amendment for exceeding FAR, as well as waivers for parking count and parking off-site. Option 1 was favorably received as it achieved the maximum parking on the site. The board's opinion was that FAR was an issue that could be addressed for this project. There was some concern expressed for saving the existing building. Remote parking at the Stephen Palmer site could add 24 spaces to all 3 options. There were some reservations expressed about restricting the future use of the Stephen Palmer site by committing to parking. The board was divided on whether to save the existing building at the expense of downtown parking. Option 2 proposes to renovate Emery Grover building and construct an addition on the rear or east side. This option achieved 48 parking spaces, including 10 spaces in front of the building. Option 2 would require additional zoning waivers to option 1, including building height, number of stories. Planning board members expressed the importance of keeping the historic building and whether parking in front of the building could be eliminated. After the April 7th presentation, we opted to revisit a scheme briefly presented early on, which is renovating Emery Grover and adding an addition rotated 90 degrees from option 2. We looked at this to see if parking counts could be improved from option 2, addressing the challenges of connecting such an addition to the existing building. This option was not presented to the planning board. A total of 42 spaces were achieved, including 10 in front of the building and a separate rear parking area of 8 spaces. To further test this option, we looked at the feasibility of constructing a parking garage under the addition. This option would provide 50 parking spaces. The garage option could work architecturally by raising grade level floor to align with the existing first floor and excavating down approximately 5 feet. There are other challenges with this scheme, with connectivity between the existing and new, but it appears feasible. And at this point, I will let Joel discuss these cost updates.
All right, hi, it's Joel Borgman. First, I just wanted to say that we actually asked CH2 to recalibrate the estimates together, because we now have 3 options and they've been taken over the last 3 or 4 months. And we thought it was best to get a common benchmark for each one. So option 1, option 2, option 3 that Reese has shown were completely restarted by CH2 and given a current benchmark of today. We did discuss where that benchmark may be going. Typically, you see a reset of construction costs when we have a slowdown in the economy, and they are projecting that in the next 6 to 12 months, we will see a resetting of the cost values. But for tonight's presentation, we're taking cost values that are known as of last week, so April 24th. I think the takeaway of the 3 options is you can see the first line, the construction cost is relatively the same between the different options. And there's approximately an $800,000 difference between option 1, 2, and 3. And that's interesting because by leveling the cost, it sort of turns the decision into what's really the best solution. To the construction cost, we've added, for this phase, a 20% soft cost. Previously, you saw quite a detailed spreadsheet, but we just took the markups, consolidated them from those spreadsheets, and that came out to be 20%. So we use that today. we've carried across the $700,000 furniture, fixture, and equipment price. Technology is a new cost. We now are bringing the technology hub into Emery Grover, so there needs to be new fiber input. We have to relocate servers, and those servers need an emergency generator. So all of that is bundled in the $1 million cost. We'll be drilling down into that with Steve and Hank and the school administration, but that's a reasonable placeholder for what we know today. Given with work that's been going on in the town, we've added in at the town's suggestion of $500,000 placeholder for solar panels, and we're carrying a contingency of 15%, which is higher than you might see for new construction, but we think it's reasonable given the unknowns on this site, and we have seen projects in this phase at 20% contingency, so we tried to strike a midpoint between the extremes and are carrying a 15% contingency, which you can see nets out at a project cost between 26 and $27 million all in. This includes relocation costs. It is what we anticipate to be the budget without factoring in reimbursements that may come out of the Community Preservation Act, which option 2 and option 3 may be eligible for. Hank?
Yeah, George has got a question. George, you want to go ahead?
Yes. My first question is, I don't see the option 3A with the garage underneath. Did you look at the costs associated with that? And the second question is regarding square footage. Do I assume that the square footage will be about the same for all three?
Well, the first answer to the first question is the underground garage is projected to cost on the order of $700,000. That includes the garage cost, and that site has ledge on it, so that's anticipating the site work that's needed for that component.
Is that included in the list?
No.
Is that that's in addition to option 3 cost?
Correct.
Yeah.
That would be a premium of $700,000 to option 3. And
Okay.
and then Reese will comment on the areas.
Yeah, the areas have not changed. They are all about the same. Option 2, option 3 are the same square footage. We took the addition from option 2 and pivoted it 90 degrees without changing the shape or the area. So they're roughly about the same square footage.
Option 1 is slightly more efficient because it's brand new.
Right.
But
remarkably, it's only a small, there's only a small increase in the square footage for options 2 and 3 over option 1. We were able to efficiently use the space that we had.
So you're saying that option 2 and 3 would have more space than option 1?
No, option 2 would have, option 2 would have more space than, more square footage than option 1. Option 1 allows us to not take advantage of not having the lost square footage of some of the space in the existing building that is not usable.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So just back to George's point on the cost. So the option 3, 26.8, you'd actually add 700, you'd be up at 27.5 for total potentially, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
At this stage of the game, yes. We're looking at a project that's somewhere around $27 million.
And is there a reason not to put in the 700,000 under the construction cost?
The only reason is the question, you gain 8 spaces effectively, 7 or 8 spaces by putting in the underground, because you lose the surface parking that option 3 has in order to gain access to the garage.
So you're paying, in essence, you're pushing $100,000 per added space.
Right.
To put it in there. And there's a question as to whether you're better off gaining more space over at Stephen Palmer.
Will the use of spaces at Stephen Palmer really restrict the use of that space after it's turned over to the town in a few years?
Reese, can you go back to one of the aerial slides that
Yeah.
I'm wondering how limiting that is to allocate spaces there now, if that really limits the use of that site in the future. Certainly has to be considered if that's the case. And related to that is, since planning board didn't see option 3 or 3 with the garage underneath, what do you think their reaction would be to either of them?
Well, they would be more favorable, I believe, for the underground parking, because it allows for the additional parking that they seem to be concerned about. I don't think they would object to the underground portion of the that we're reserving for the parking. It's really hard to tell. We haven't really explored that issue with them. But they were concerned, as Joel said, about the number of spaces, and we would be adding to that parking count with that design.
But this is Joel again. I think that given the comments that they gave on option 3 that were favorable, and the options that they were asked us to maybe take a look at, I think they would be in favor and support option 3 or option 3A, the L-shaped scheme. There didn't seem to be an obstacle to that option.
So I'm going to go to the questions, a couple questions here. Roy's got his square footage the same on all of these. I believe we've answered that. And you got to do the cost estimate, include the cost of parking at Stephen Palmer. I believe we answered that in option 3. It's not in there. Oh, I'm sorry. No, sorry. Let me go back to that. Do the cost estimates include the cost of parking at Stephen Palmer? That's an open question.
I believe they do. Isn't that correct, Reese?
I believe that they included some remote parking costs. I would want to just double check that.
Okay,
It's
can we
in
get
the
that?
outline. We'll have to double check the estimate. It is in the scope of work, but
Yes.
Okay. Will we make a note of that, please, and get an answer back? And then next from Natasha, what is the anticipated historical credit?
well, historical tax credit, the town's not eligible to get historical tax credits. You'd have to have a private entity do the development, take advantage of the credits, and then figure out how to turn it back over to the town some way.
And I thought that in general that there was some type of some type of credit that we got if we kept the building. Is it a
Well, you
historical
could use
credit?
potentially Community Preservation Act funds could be utilized for the renovation of the building in
Okay.
option 2 or 3. And we have met with them, and we know roughly the range of funds that are available, and then it's not clear exactly of those funds that are available how much might be provided for Emory Grover, but they would certainly support a renovation project.
So do you have like I mean, it could be 0, but it could also be, what do they typically give for these types of projects? Do you have any idea? I mean, is it $100,000 or 50 or
No,
a
it could
million?
it could be in the millions. It could be, I don't want to go on the record exactly with what they have available.
No, but just kind of ballpark, is it worth considering as part of the, kind of the summary of this exercise?
Yeah, the Community Preservation Act funds would be significant and help to offset the price in a significant manner.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks. And then the next question, Matthew Spengler, are there any significant operating cost differences between the new versus the renovated buildings over time?
That's a great question. I think that the existing building, when it's renovated, the modern technology is such that it turns out to be better not to insulate the old masonry buildings because they tend to last better when they are uninsulated, and the mass masonry can remain heated on the inside. So it would be a little bit less efficient of a building. So I would expect your operating costs and maintenance costs would be less with the all new building. I don't know exactly how to put a factor on that. Is it, 2 to 5%? I would think it's probably in that range.
All right, I believe that's...
I have one more question, if I could.
Yeah, just hold on a second, George. I just want to make sure, Roy, I know you asked this question about the cost for the remote parking, but we've already answered that, I believe. That's a question that needs to be taken action on it. So go ahead, George.
In the 3 options, is the scope of work the same for all 3? In other words, did we account for IT and a meeting room, et cetera, the same for all 3 cases?
Yeah, the program for all 3 schemes is the same, and we were able to achieve the department square footages and spatial square footages, whether it was the new construction or the renovation addition.
Okay, great.
I think
And
that looking at this slide here, just to reiterate, the biggest and most unanimous comment, I think, from the planning board was, if there's something we could do to the front of the building to get rid of the parking and asphalt and restore it to the landscape that is there in Reese's opening slide, that was maybe the most common comment from all of the planning board members.
I wouldn't say from all of them, but there were certain members that did express that.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the parking and landscape was the bigger topic of most.
That's 10 spaces that are currently included in options 2 and 3.
Yeah. Okay, great. At this point, Hank, is there anything more from a presentation perspective? Because then I think the next question really is, where do we need to go from here at this point?
I think that's it in terms of presentation. We were going to further review the detailed costs. We will look into the remote parking construction costs, make sure that that is included within the total, and then BH+A will begin preparing their draft report. They're probably halfway through that already with a lot of the earlier material. And the question, I guess, we had for the school committee was whether a presentation to school committee on the 5th of May, the same night that we're going to be presenting the school master plan, whether that would be an appropriate time to also review the Emory Grover building.
Hank, I have talked with Dan on that, and he thought it would be appropriate.
Okay.
And
And
that's May when?
May 5th, Cinco de Mayo.
Next Tuesday, right?
There we
Yep.
go. Yeah, this is
Yeah.
Matt from the school committee. If you've already talked about that with Dan and you're already linking it to the other presentation, that seems to be the reasonable way to go.
And I was thinking, Stuart, that it would be appropriate. We were going to be talking about a chairs meeting to discuss one of the topics later on the agenda.
Yep.
That we might want to give a briefing of where we are with this study at that time as well.
Okay. I'll make a note. Yeah, we had that on the 7th, Steve.
So if I could sort of just, speaking out loud, looking at what we have, and understanding that the cost premium for tearing down, keeping the existing building isn't really there. In fact, the cost estimates right now show that it's less cost to keep the existing building and add an addition. I sort of feel that answers the question that option 1 is not the preferred option going forward. And that options 2 and 3, and I think option 3, in my mind, has a lot better issues associated with it, principally the light issue that we initially thought might be very beneficial. And also the allowance of possibly entering into an underground parking scheme. That option 3 seems to me to be the preferred option on the table.
I would tend to agree with your comments, Steve, based on discussions in the past with the selectmen certainly wanting to avoid tearing the building down, and the historical groups that are out there also would be adverse to tearing it down. So it seems that cost-wise, there is certainly a nicer option, option 2 and 3. But in terms of getting back to the front of the building and getting to the landscape portion, is it option 2 again? Because option 3 you can see right here. But if you go back to option 2 for a minute, yeah, see, it seems that of the 3 things, parking, landscape, and historical significance, it seems that the landscaping piece wouldn't be addressed.
Except in option 1.
Right.
Unless they don't want to have the additional parking spaces if you have them under the addition. I agree about option 3. I think it's the best solution for a lot of different reasons, but I think it opens up the opportunity to have parking underneath it and have a better front of the building.
Well, I don't think that you can eliminate the 10 spaces in the front while going to the option with the parking underneath, because you're then reducing your total parking count. Let's see, there are 10 in front,
Yeah.
so you'd be reducing it back into the 30s.
Right, but you're giving something back, right? You're giving a better front landscape opportunity. So it's a negotiation.
It would be a negotiation. You're correct, but we can't just talk about the Stephen Palmer. There would have to be some deed associated with the restriction of use of that portion of the Stephen Palmer site going forward, because they would insist that they be tied to this building.
Yeah, could I make a comment?
Yeah, go ahead, Roy.
I think option 3 with the additional parking makes sense, but I think the problem is I'd like to take Stephen Palmer off of it, because you're taking a grassy area and paving it, right? So can we offset that cost? You know, maybe we can make the front of this building a little better aesthetically without losing the parking spaces. And then you keep the whole thing in one site and you don't deal with Stephen Palmer.
I think the only way to achieve that would be to put a full deck with underground parking underneath the building and underneath the deck, similar to what they have at the at the hospital. And that's quite an intrusion into this type of space.
It's also much more expensive.
Yes, much more expensive. We're probably talking then 50 to 75, because you'd have to sprinkler that as well. You'd probably be talking around $75,000 per space.
But I thought the current plan had about 15 spaces.
Right, but there's a difference between putting deck parking where you have 2 levels, let's say, because you have
I
to
completely
have.
get it, George.
Got it?
I'm
Okay.
just asking is it enough spaces with the ones that you mentioned for the whatever premium it was? Is it enough spaces on that site to argue that we don't have to add Stephen Palmer parking?
No,
Okay.
because just to satisfy the occupants of the building, you need nearly 60 spaces, 60 to 70 spaces.
I think the number was 62 spaces that Ann had identified, 45 staff and 17 concurrent spaces.
Is the 45 staff FTEs? I mean, they're full-time?
That was my understanding.
Yeah, plus we're bringing over a lot of IT folks who are often out in the various buildings installing IT in each building. So they touch down at Broadmeadow today and are not necessarily present all day, but they do come and go quite a bit.
Can
Right.
Go ahead. Sorry.
That was in the 17 concurrent spaces that that Ann had summarized in an earlier memo.
I have a quick question.
Yep.
Okay, so go ahead.
Stuart?
Yeah, go ahead, George.
Just a quick one. Joel, Joel and Reese, are you planning on putting in a kind of a chart in the report that shows the comparison of the 3 options, not necessarily just for cost, but also what the various features are or difficulties such as zoning requirement differences, et cetera? Have you done that? Or are you planning on doing something like that?
Yes.
Yes.
You planning on putting something like that in?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think that maybe the front of the building could benefit from, at some point bringing a landscape architect to look at it. We've been trying to jam as much into the building and be as efficient as we can to make these schemes work, and they haven't really been looked at from a different perspective that might benefit.
Joel, I think that's a really good point, Joel, and I think you guys have done a great job. I think there are ways of doing parking where you can do different paving and make it more like a garden, like a parking garden that can be used when the building's not in use as a different option for programming for the town. So just at the front. And so there could be opportunities where you can do a hybrid in that area.
Yeah, I mean, I think the angled parking is sort of glaring against the classic facade.
Hi, this is Matt Spangler. I just recommend that as we prepare for the presentation that there are a couple of slides, as George mentioned, also about the how the design options are meeting different needs of the school department for each one. I know that there are some real similarities, but I think certainly folks around the table and online would want to understand what the design the design components afford school district functionality. Thanks.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, great. So at this point, just a quick note from Ann. She said that there's 48 permanent FTE when you include the full IT. I know there was a question out there regarding that. So in terms of next steps, you laid them out, Hank, in terms of getting the costs, getting the remote parking question answered. There's going to be a presentation to the school committee. There'll be a brief on the potential chair meeting. At this point, relative to the timeline of doing the report, can you just give us a quick, we're kind of running over on the time lot here, but can you just, Hank, just in terms of timeline?
Well, Joel, my sense is you are ready to wrap this up. Certainly.
Our draft report's done except for wrapping in option 3A. So we can have that done in a week and then send it to you for final review and then wrap up a final report after get comments from the school committee.
Is it fair to say that in 2 weeks' time, our next meeting, we could review the draft and have our inputs?
Okay.
That I'm going to look to others, Hank, the committee. If we set that as a timeline, is that doable? Steve Popper, any comments? Hank?
Yeah. Getting the report out is one thing. I think the discussion with the selectmen is important because what is really our timeline right now, our broad timeline with regard to this project is to seek design funds a year from now at Maytown meeting. And to get there, we thought, well, we had set that timeline probably because we felt it was important to get consensus and that there would be more of a dialogue on whether or not the tear down versus the renovation renovation addition would happen. Judging from the numbers, and I'd like to give us a chance to just vet those numbers a little bit closer. It doesn't seem like there is a rationale for tearing down the building because you're not saving money. Which in my mind was the primary reason for tearing down the building.
Well, but also to the space, right? The efficiency. As much as we could sit, it won't be as costly. I mean, the costs are so close, and renovating may not be as expensive as demolition. I think the issue I still see is the bang for the buck, because if you've got unusable space, you're not effectively using that lot and its space. Somewhere down the road, there's going to be a push. But I think you said earlier in this discussion that the square footage is about the same across all options. So maybe that, bang for the buck isn't in play anymore.
Right. Well, if you're not getting any bang for tearing down the building, what's the point of tearing down the building?
Right. I just want to make sure the space is used effectively. But so sorry, just to pull it back, Steve. So basically, if the draft report can be pulled together, and in 2 weeks' time we could come back to the costs and look at the draft for any commentary, any potential feedback from the selectmen and others, we can also bring into that discussion, and then decide at that point where we go from there. Is that a good plan to take?
Yeah, I think having the report out and understanding who do we reach out to make a decision there, without the vetting period where you needed to draw a consensus, it seems to me like we're coming up with an obvious pathway a lot quicker. And I don't know if the full committee is going to try to push for an earlier resolution and go for design funds, for example, in September or November, I'm sorry, October, November, or wait until, Maytown meeting, which was our original thought, moving forward. Moving the timeline up on the construction costs or on design costs with construction costs following a year from that doesn't save us a lot of time because we have to work within the school calendar year, and we were looking at a September 2025 occupancy. We can in no way can we achieve the September 2024 occupancy, but we might be able to achieve something in between if that is appealing to the schools. Of course, the other big aspect which has to be drawn out is the finance situation.
Right. But for the purposes of this report, we can pull it together and start working the draft.
We can. I just don't know what we are going to, we'll have to hear from the schools and from selectmen as to what they think are the different obstacles we have to, address as we go forward requesting town meeting money.
Okay, great. Okay. I see you just typed in something, Ann. All right. Are there time delays associated with the new construction option, tear down historic building, that need to be considered as part of the financial analysis?
They're identical, actually, in many respects. The tear down would be equivalent in many regards to gutting the existing building before you renovate it.
Steve, I think they're referring to the demolition delay that would be imposed on
There is a possible delay in that regard. Thank you.
but you can apply for a demolition delay without having to do the building permit. So that could be happening in the next year's time if that was the option that was selected. In other words, it doesn't have to wait until you apply for your building permit to do the demolition.
And then there are also unknowns if it's challenged in court or anything like that.
That's correct.
Okay, great. Okay, we're way over time. If there's no other questions, I think we have the right action plan. Hank, you're all set with that, right?
Yep, thank you.
All right, thank you.
And is there any voting items? I don't see any voting items, Catherine, that was sent on the sheet. Just asking one more time, is there any other action items that we need to take, Hank, on this topic?
No.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Joel and team and folks. We're going to move to the next topic. Again, for people that have joined throughout this meeting, the way we're trying to run this is really in three pieces. Each topic, which is the introduction of the topic. There's a main presenter. Once we get through the main presenter, we'll go to questions. Three ways actually to do questions. One is to use the chat window and type in questions there, and I'll try and trap those. Cover that. There's also a way in Zoom to actually raise your hand electronically through the bottom bar, or worst case, start waving your hands and somewhere I'll pick it up. But just please be considerate with the electronic aspects of these meetings. There's a little bit of delay, and we'll try and be civil through the whole process. So with this, I will turn this over to who? Which is the school master plan. I know that Dora Whittier's got a presentation, but first, in terms of Hank, or any commentary or?
No, Jason Boone will take over. He'll walk you through several schemes that are refinements of the prior presentation, and also options that had not yet been drawn up that were on their master list. So I'll just turn it over to Jason and let him move forward on the presentation.
Okay, also, sorry, Hank, it's just once Jason's done, we'll do questions. I just want to reiterate, folks, especially for those who've joined, this meeting is being recorded. It's only for the purposes of note-taking and reference. So it'll be around for the short term. In the long term, we will not be keeping the recording. So just be aware it is a recorded meeting. Sorry, thanks, Jason. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think Hank described what the objectives are for our time with you tonight fairly accurately. We want to start with a quick schedule update and then move into a review of the scenarios we've already presented to you. Share with you some new things that we hadn't tested yet when we spoke to you last, and end the presentation with a brief discussion about grade configuration and the questions that may ultimately drive the master plan. So with that, in terms of the schedule, because we've explored some additional things that we originally weren't planning to explore, and because of our new work from home environment, the schedule has slipped a bit. So for April, we're continuing to conduct test fits, and we plan to update the school committee actually in the first week of May next week, to go out and seek our cost estimates next month, and then start talking about evaluating the various scenarios and seeing if any preferences for any one particular master plan scenario start to emerge, and then to publish our draft report of the master plan in July. So in terms of the scenario review, just to remind you of what we're exploring, there are 7 different scenarios currently being explored. Some of them have different grade configurations. Each of them has a different number of projects associated with them. We've walked you through these several times, but just to quickly run through them one more time, the status quo maintains the existing grade configuration and attempts to solve all of the issues that have been identified on the same sites where those issues have been identified. The next column, the next scenario, keeps the same grade configuration, but it speculates about moving 6th, 7th, and 8th grade all to be under one roof. In this case, all at the Pollard site, which means High Rock would be vacated for a purpose yet to be determined. High Rock as an elementary school is the same scenario, same grade configuration, all the 6th through 8th graders at the Pollard site. The difference is, rather than being repurposed for an unknown future, High Rock could be repurposed as a 6th elementary school, which means that the project associated with the Mitchell site could be smaller. The next 2 scenarios are similar. The first one is instead of 1 6th through 8 middle school at the Pollard site, it speculates about taking the existing Newman building and converting that to a 6th through 8 middle school. So there'll be 1 at Pollard and 1 at Newman, which would require High Rock to be a elementary school. The challenge with this one, of course, which we talked about last time, it means that the project at Mitchell would have to be much larger, a 7-section elementary school. The next 2 are grade reconfigurations, changing the elementary to a K4 set of schools. The middle school experience would be 5 through 8. And in this first one, all of those would be at the Pollard site, and High Rock would be available to be repurposed. In the second one, it would be 2 5 through 8s, 1 at Newman and 1 at Pollard. But because it's a K4 grade configuration at the elementary schools, the Mitchell project could still be 3 sections, but the pre-K program that currently exists at Newman would have to be relocated as part of that project. And then finally, the final scenario that we've explored was the idea of a super school, solving the elementary and middle school issues all in one project, all in one site. And as we discussed last time, our test fits demonstrated that we didn't have a site big enough for that to be feasible. So here's a summary of all the things that we've now tested. We're going to talk about a few of them that we haven't shown you yet tonight, but these are the 4 scenarios that appear to be feasible. The status quo, with the only question being, can we really put an addition at High Rock? The single 6 through 8 at Pollard, the the single 6th through 8 at Pollard with High Rock being repurposed as an elementary school, and this concept of 2 5 through 8 middle schools, one of them being at Newman and one of them being at Pollard, which is where our focus will be later tonight. So the 3 new test fits we want to share with you are exactly that: the test fit of a 5 through 8 at Newman. If swing space becomes necessary to execute a project at Mitchell, where that swing space project might take place. And similarly, if an addition proves too difficult to do at the High Rock site, could a freestanding 6th grade project be executed at DeFazio Park? So the first scenario we're going to share with you is actually an update to one you've already seen, the idea of all the 6th through 8th graders being at the Pollard Middle School site as an addition renovation project. And so if you recall, we shared this site plan illustration with you where the addition is represented in orange, approximately 80,000 square feet of addition. The gray represents the existing Pollard Middle School. And what we had shown you was this sort of parking and site circulation layout. What's been updated here is in our previous illustration, we did not have the existing connection out to Dedham Ave illustrated. And so now that we have that in there, the consequence of the field, maybe that field gets a little bit smaller. We did, however, confirm with our landscape architect that the grading and the location of these parking areas and drive aisles can be managed with the topography that exists at Pollard. The other thing we've updated is we've done the arithmetic associated with full-time teaching equivalents, the number of faculty and staff that would be associated with a 6th through 8 middle school. You see the numbers there. And based on zoning targets at 1.5 times the full-time equivalent, technically this site would need 328 spaces. And what's being illustrated here is around 262, with some adjustments to how the parking aisles are oriented. That 262 number may be able to climb some. Here's that same illustration, except represented as a 3D view. What's important about this is in many of the discussion we've been talking about, even if all of the site circulation and parking and the addition can occur, is it appropriate or is it politically feasible to have this many students in this particular neighborhood, right? How does it impact traffic and site circulation, for example? And so that's an ongoing discussion. The next test fit we want to share with you is new to this group for this study, but it comes from some of our previous work. If the concept is to execute a project on the Mitchell site without the students on that piece of property, it may be necessary to construct a temporary school on the DeFazio property. So what's being depicted here in the dark red color is a single-story modular classroom building with approximately 30 classroom-sized boxes, some administrative space, and a permanent multi-purpose room that would remain after the facility is no longer needed for swing space. And so in terms of parking, what's shown here is that the Mitchell FTE is around 70 faculty and staff. So the zoning target for that population would be around 105. But because of all of the other site amenities here, the play fields and playgrounds, the parking that's been depicted is 265 spaces. Another variation of that to test whether or not more parking spaces could be accommodated on this site was a 5-section elementary school, but explored as a 2-story modular classroom facility rather than a single story. And again, this illustration is from our previous work. So again, here you have 36 great classroom-sized boxes, some administrative space, and a permanent multi-purpose room. The key difference is because it's a 2-story temporary facility, you can accommodate more parking on the site. We get as many as 365 parking spaces in this particular test fit. So similarly, and also at DeFazio, the reason that the addition at High Rock is in question is not only is it in a location that may prove difficult for construction logistics, but it also results in some windowless classroom space. So this test fit represents an alternative to that. So this would be a 2-story freestanding 6th grade center, obviously a much larger building, around 115,000 total gross square feet. And as a result, there are far fewer parking spaces for field use than in the elementary schemes. But a 6th grade center could be constructed on this property, but would not have as many parking spaces. And then finally, I'm sorry, there's 2 more to go. The idea of putting an addition on Pollard to serve roughly half of the 5th through 8th grade population, approximately 950 students, would require a 2-story addition and would likely be placed at the end of the 2-story component on the western side of the existing building. We don't yet have the site circulation drawn in here, but it would be similar to what we showed for the 6 through 8 on the same piece of property. And then finally, in addition at Newman, to accommodate the balance of the 5th through 8th grade population, approximately 1,100 students, would require a 2-story addition. So here's the existing Newman. The front door is in this corner. This is the auditorium that sticks out to the east in this site plan. The gymnasium is here to the north. And so the test fit addition actually wraps around the gymnasium with a 2-story addition out here, essentially running parallel to the existing fields, around 76,000 total square feet for that. What an addition would do in that location is not only connect to the existing classroom wing, but would allow you to circumnavigate the gym and connect back to the public spaces at the, excuse me, on the east side of the existing building. So here's what that addition looks like in 3 dimensions to demonstrate how it relates to the site around it. In this conceptual test fit, it appears that this size addition could be constructed and not negatively impact the existing fields to the west. What it would impact is the existing playground. So conceptually, 5th and 6th grade would be in the existing building, 7th and 8th grade classrooms would be in the new building, and the front of the building would all largely be specials: art, music, physical education, administrative space, the library. So again, we've tested everything that's on our list. The conclusion was that the 2 6th through 8 middle schools, because of the size of the Mitchell project, would not be feasible. That all of the 5th through 8th graders on a single site would not be feasible, and both a new elementary school and a 6th through 8 all under one roof as a super school would not be feasible. So again, that leaves us with these 4 scenarios as master plan options to consider. One of which is a significant grade reconfiguration. So I think for us, for Doran Whittier, what's come to the front is that a question about grade configuration may be the thing that drives how we think about what might come out of this master planning effort, right? The essential question, because there's a capacity issue at High Rock, the essential question is, should 6th, 7th, and 8th grade all be under one roof? And just to quickly walk you through this flow chart, if the answer to that question is no, there's a couple of different options. You're still going to have to do something at Pollard, but if we're going to keep 6th grade as a freestanding facility, you can either put an addition on High Rock with all of its construction challenges that we've already talked about, or what we just shared tonight, a new freestanding 6th grade center at DeFazio, and then proceed with the master plan downstream of that. Build a temporary swing school at DeFazio for the Mitchell project and construct a 5-section Mitchell school. In the other leg, build the 6th grade center, convert High Rock to an elementary school, and build a smaller project on the Mitchell property. If the answer to that educational question is yes, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade really should be all together as they were years ago, again, there are some choices. I think what we've demonstrated is that at least geographically and geometrically, an addition large enough to house all of the 6th through 8th graders at Pollard is feasible. That would make High Rock available as a 6th elementary school, and you could execute the small project at Mitchell. So that pathway is essentially only a 2-project path. In the other one, you're executing a grade reconfiguration, pulling 5th grade out of the elementary schools, and it becomes necessary to do a small addition at Pollard and a more major addition at Newman before High Rock can become an elementary school, and then a 3-section plus the pre-K children at the Mitchell project. So that's where we see some discussion being necessary, most likely with the school committee, but with our working group as well. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Stuart, for questions.
Okay, thanks, Jason. It's great. Anybody have any questions? I don't see any questions in the chat panel. I don't see any raised hands, so I'm sure people have some questions. Sue?
Yeah, I just thought I would mention that I think from a school's standpoint, and feel free to say whatever you think is appropriate here, but I think it's a little bit of a hard sell to the school committee to do a K through 4, 5 to 8 grade configuration. That's very different than what we have in place right now. That would be a much bigger change for the town and for the school system in general. So I'm a little reluctant to think that we're going to head in that direction. I think it is appropriate to have that conversation with the school committee, but I just wanted to put it out to the PBBC that I think that is a much bigger sell. It's already, I think it's a little bit of a sell to move the 6th grade to Pollard, but I think ultimately that is something that we can work with and figure out, what we want Pollard to look like. If it had the 6th grade, maybe the 6th grade is more contained, more self-contained in a way that feels more like having the 6th grade center that we have right now, but also provides a lot of advantages that the middle school teachers have spoken about in terms of staffing and transitions and those sorts of things that I think make sense. So I just want to put that out there to everybody.
Others?
I will just say, Stuart, to the committee that in our discussions in the working group, I have expressed some concern about the size of the Pollard site to handle 1,450 students, and whether or not how realistic that becomes. Doran Whittier has done a good job at configuring the space, but the circulation that occurs, the political will to deal with the neighborhood that surrounds the Pollard School, those parking, a significant amount of buffer, in fact, is going to disappear between the houses on Coolidge and the Pollard site, which I can think is going to be an issue that's going to have to be dealt with if we pursue that. So I just want to make mention that I do have serious concerns about the Pollard site being able to get through all the politics that are necessary to make that site accommodate or allow that site to accommodate the 1,450 student population that's required.
But I think with that, it's if the 6th, 7th, and 8th should be together, you have to do a Pollard ad on all these options right here. right? Because if you don't want them together, you still have to do a reno and add the Pollard. You do want them together. Every single one of those branches requires something to Pollard. So am I missing something? But it looks like we have no choice. There's going to have to be a discussion of Pollard, correct?
You're exactly right, Stuart. The difference in those is the scale.
Right.
So, in this first box addition at Pollard, that's an 80,000 square foot addition. In this 5 through 8 scenario, because it's only it's close to half of the 5 through 8 population, it's only a 16,000 square foot population and far fewer students, 950 students. So there's a big difference between 1,432 students and 950 students. I think that's Steve's point.
And okay, but then on the left-hand side, when you have no, how big is that Pollard?
So that would be serving the existing 7 through 8 population. So that addition would be roughly the same size as the small addition over here,
14.
because that's mostly about solving the science deficiencies and getting the grade level clusters to work properly.
Okay. Got it.
And it would also, all of these would also have to do some renovation at Pollard of existing spaces.
Right. When we talk about a renovation addition, any project at Pollard, I think we're all assuming that that's going to be to position that building to extend its useful life for another, 30 to 50 years. So it would be a missing square strategy where you would renovate. You do an addition, then you would move kids into that addition and then vacate part of the existing building, renovate that portion, and continue that process until you've effectively renovated the entire Pollard facility.
Okay. I see you, George, with a hand, and Sue. I'm going to go back to Sue, and then I'll go to you, George. Go ahead, Sue.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. Stuart, I just wanted to ask, Jason, could you address what the school enrollment issues are at High Rock? Because I'm just remembering that a big problem is that High Rock really is running up against its limit. And so if we don't move the 6th grade to Pollard, then we're looking at, either that combine, 2-school, middle school, or we have to build an entire new project and go to DeFazio.
You're on mute, Jason.
What I have on the screen now is the enrollment forecast that McKibben just recently completed. And so here you see the enrollment numbers for the 6th grade. It's going to jump around a bit, but right at 500 right now. And then the lowest it gets is 450 students. And we had presented the capacity arithmetic at our last PBBC meeting and demonstrated that there needed to be 10 classrooms added to the High Rock facility in order to meet this forecast, even though it's going down in the forecast. It's a school that was designed for far fewer students than what will be there over the next 15 years. And so there is a real capacity need at High Rock, even though the enrollment forecast is for it to be declining.
I think it's also important to point out some of the discussions within the working group where both the principals of 6th grade and 7th and 8th are advocates of combining all 3 grades in a single school, where that really hasn't been expressed clearly. They believe pedagogically it makes sense. So we're confronted with the educational advantage of it against the planning and traffic problems that it would create if it were all associated with a single location.
Right.
George? Sorry. Do you have a follow-up, Jason?
No, I was just going to quickly reshare that capacity arithmetic, if you can see that. the current enrollment is 499, and the capacity of the building is between 390 and 415. And like I just shared, the forecast is between 430 and 477. So there's a real disconnect there driving the classroom need at High Rock.
And can you also go back and show the plan of where you would put the addition so that people understand?
Sure.
Oh, just passed.
That was the
You just passed it.
yeah, that's the High Rock as an elementary school. Maybe it wasn't in this
Oh,
show.
It was. Go up a little bit.
Yeah, I don't see it in there, Hank.
Okay.
So
Yeah, let me dig that out, Michelle, and I'll put that up on the screen also.
George.
You want my question now?
Yeah, go ahead, George.
With regard to 6th, 7th, and 8th at Pollard, I'm also very concerned not only about the comments Steve made about processing that many kids in that neighborhood coming and going, pickups, drop-offs, separation of buses from cars. It's going to be a real zoo and a difficult logistics issue. The second thing, however, is I'm concerned about the ability of the school. Once you put an addition in there, I don't think you're going to add a gym, for example, in the addition. Is that correct?
We're not assuming a new gym. No.
Okay, so that means that the current 2 gyms that they have, I think, are pretty well utilized and would probably be overloaded when you add another 450 kids in there. And the same is true with the cafeteria. I'm wondering if you can even have lunch with that many kids in that cafeteria, and not overload it and have a problem with fire codes. I think the issues associated with gym, cafeteria, assembly space are all issues that are going to be constraining if you add another 450 students to that building.
You know, those are fair questions, George, and those are things that we can all, you know, confirm or refute. If we were to use the MSBA, you know, space summary template as a guide, then both the gymnasium space and the cafeteria space are on par for this size population.
They are.
They are.
Wow, I'm surprised.
But we have all of the Pollard scheduling data. And so that's something that we can confirm.
Does anyone know how many lunches they have at Pollard right now? I'm just curious.
We do have that information. I don't have it at my fingertips. But
It's not needed right now, but I think I believe you. I'm not doubting you. I'm just surprised.
George, I also wanted to comment on regarding the traffic issues. I think I've said this before too, once you can get traffic off of Harris Street, you've created a better situation. And I think Jason's plan is showing that with the parking and the drop-off loops that would be created, you'd be getting traffic off of Harris Street. So you would no longer have parents dropping their children off on the side of the road, and the kind of drop-off and pickup situations that are happening today.
George, I think the other aspect, and it's not quite shown on the floor plan, Jason, maybe you can go back. When we looked at that site plan before, if you simply extend the bus drop-off lane down to the upper left-hand corner, you can fit all 10 buses on the site at one time, which would get the buses off of, they'd be single loaded, they wouldn't be double loaded, double stacked. And when you eliminate the need to have all buses come from High Rock, your bus arrival and departure in the morning is not as congested, and you don't have that 5-minute window where you have to unload and reload all the buses. So you're taking away some of that congestion. You can also use the circulation that goes all the way around the building as and around the parking lots as part of the staging for parents, getting them off of Harris Ave.
So that's an important next step for us. We're going to illustrate what the site circulation might actually look like with scaled vehicles to try to determine how many parent vehicles we could get onto the property at one time in an afternoon pickup situation, for example. And that may, either confirm people's fears or, allay them once we get that work accomplished.
And then also, George, we would have to go back to planning, but some limited number of the buses could be exiting onto Dedham Avenue, not entering, but exiting at the end of the day. So you might be able, for instance, to separate the vans to the lower portion from the buses on the upper side.
And turn left there or just turn right onto Dedham Avenue?
I think it's just turn right.
Okay, so just a quick, it looks like Ann responded, and then I'm going to turn to you, Natasha. George, Ann's saying that there's 2 grade 7 lunches and 2 grade 8 lunches daily. Okay. Natasha?
Are there any disadvantages of having a 6th grade school? Or advantage, like what are the advantages of having a 6th grade school versus the combined? Just to,
The real advantage now is that everybody loves it.
no, I know. I mean, I think that in general, the 6th graders, especially the young 6th graders, like the fact that they're not with the 8th graders. But in general, I mean, I think that's what some of the kids have said. But beyond that, is there I don't know enough about the educational aspect of keeping the 6th grade separate. Is there, I guess, an advantage?
I can comment a little bit on that, Natasha. The programmatic experience of the 6th graders is impaired by the facility itself. There just aren't enough spaces to offer the spectrum of electives, for example, that Pollard can offer because it has more space, right? The gym experience is very limited because of the size of the gym.
Right, but if they had a brand new school with everything at the space, is it still advantageous to have 6 separate than 7, 8, or is it advantageous to have them all together for a different reason, right?
Well, I mean, we can have that discussion on a lot of different levels. What the literature would tell you about the grade configuration lens is it's far better for students to be with the same group of faculty and staff under the same roof for as long as you can have them. So sort of a 1-year experience with 2 transitions on either side is sort of the worst situation for students from a grade configuration point of view. Operationally, you're duplicating faculty and staff potentially because you have the programs and services repeated in 2 locations.
So it sounds like the Pollard with an addition is more advantageous, except the site is not ideal for that situation, but there is a connection through the tunnel, underneath the train tracks to a portion of the site that I remember a while ago when we were looking at Hillside, we investigated that area, which was more adjacent to Pollard. Is there an opportunity for that, for the fields to be used, during the day? So that you can have some co-sharing of that? I'm not sure. I'm just trying to figure out how the site is jam-packed if you add an addition. So then how can you alleviate that by using the adjacent fields?
I think you would be forced in this instance to make the field into a turf field so it would have the usability year-round. What we've been told by the PE teachers is that by the time the kids get changed, which in middle school you get changed, and then you go out to the fields over at DeFazio, you're left with so little time to do your educational program that they really don't rely on those fields today, those other fields at all today. And some of the fields that are closest to them are also fairly damp. So you'd have to go quite a distance to get to the track or to get to the other turf fields.
And are those fields, just in general, would they ever be reconstructed so that they could be more usable for this particular school? Rather than, I mean, anyway, because they're right. I mean, if you're going to go to that field that's there, you could potentially walk, another 50 feet to the field on the other side of the train tracks.
Yes, and it is somewhat counterintuitive. The walking to and fro is part of your physical education, but it doesn't necessarily meet their curriculum requirements.
So I know, Sue, you've got a question?
No, I think that it's been handled. I was just going to mention what some of the thinking was on the 6th grade standalone versus with 7 and 8. And I would just say that I think that Needham has done a phenomenal job with managing the 6th grade center and making it as well received as it has been, because the execution on that has been really great. But particularly for special ed kids, the double transition is really, really hard. And there's also some staff sharing that makes scheduling very complicated. So I think everybody else captured the rest of it, but I just wanted to add that.
Okay, great. All right, we're over time on a number of things, but can we just use the last few minutes, Hank, to just wrap up next actions and expectations timeline-wise?
Jason, I'll let you go back to that first slide. Cost estimating would be the next.
Right.
We do want to get direct feedback from the school committee about this diagram that he has up on the screen, and whether there are any sub-variations that need to be explored within these categories.
Yeah, so cost estimating is the next big step. We have enough information developed now that we know how many square feet, for example, is being renovated versus how much square feet is going to be a new addition, basic concepts for site planning. And so our intent is to send all that information out to the cost estimator in May and get that back as quickly as we can.
Okay. Anything else, Hank or Steve?
Stuart, I have a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Graphically, I think all of your presentation has been great. I think this to me is the hardest one to read because everything is gray. I don't know if there's a way of putting High Rock as a color and doing a legend or something, just and maybe putting the, what number it is, 1, 2, 3, or whatever it is, so that you can relate to it. But I think the other parts of the presentation have been very clear. Just for this one, I had to read each one of them, and it was harder to figure out what you were trying to do.
Fair enough. We'll see how we can improve that, Natasha.
Okay. All right, Hank or Steve, anything final?
Nothing here.
Nope.
Okay, and there is no voting items on this piece I can see. So I think with that, we'll close out this topic. Thank you, Jason and Michelle and others. Okay. All right, the next topic is the Central Ave and Jack Cogswell building, particularly the solar panel. Again, I do see some people have joined. Pretty standard. The meeting is being recorded. We're going to go through the presentation. We're going to go through a quick introduction and then go through the presentation, and then we'll do questions at the end. I think this particular topic will require a little bit more description, especially when it comes to the costs and the programs. And just hopefully most of you have read or looked at the presentation that was sent out. I did. I certainly have some questions, but I'm hoping that we'll get them answered. I think is it Steve Gentile, you're going to take this, and then Beth, I think you're going to do a presentation, or how do you want to do this, Steve?
I was just going to introduce Beth. I can go over the project generally. There's a few things. We had some occupancy sensors installed in the building this past week. the animal guard. So that'll constitute a change order. And the weather station will be installed next week as part of the police fire project. And we have a little bit of retainage, and the GC wants to, for the site subcontractor wants to be paid, but we can't pay them yet because we need to still have the Concom sign off on some of the erosion controls on the site, and it's been raining incredibly. So that's basically where the site is at this point. We still want to get some thermostats into the building that are single, but that we will continue to work through the details on that. But in terms of the solar, Beth and I have been working on a financial analysis because we didn't know if installing these solar panels on the roof would be worth it. And so we started going down a couple different paths. And so Beth came up with the best case, a worst case, and a conservative case. And maybe the best way to do this is just have Beth take us through her presentation and see where that leads to questions.
Okay, and just before you start, Beth, for everybody's benefit, again, let Beth go through the presentation. If you could put your questions into the chat panel or raise your hand electronically or wave your hand, but do that at the end. I like to get through the presentation so we can at least get a baseline, and then we'll go through the dialogue. Thanks. Go ahead, Beth.
Okay. Everybody, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So as Steve may have told you in the past, I think one of the initial charges we had was to look at this project, at least initially, as an opportunity either to engage a third party to own and operate the asset, or look for Needham to own the asset itself. And so after a series of discussions and some analysis, but more so discussions with Dave Davison and others, we remained focused on looking at Needham evaluating this under a town ownership model. So, oops. Okay, so I wanted to just give you a general overview. Again, I relied on data that had already previously been provided to the town, where we're looking at a system size at about 204 kW DC, with annual generation expected in the 216,000 plus kilowatt hours per year, degrading at 0.5% per year because of the degradation that happens with the modules year over year. The estimated annual usage, again, we only had 4 or 5 months of actual historical data, and most of that historical data was occurring during commissioning of the building. So its sort of normal operating performance was not really known. Steve and I spent some time projecting, estimating what we thought the annual consumption would be per month. With that, I did an allocation. Again, it's an estimate. It's a not knowing exactly how much the building's going to use and the perfect timing of the array. I estimated that about 88% of the generation is of the requirement in the building will be served by the solar, and about 94% of the overall generation is going to be sent to Eversource. So most of the usage of the building will be offset by solar, but 94% of what the solar actually produces is going to be sold to Eversource under either, which we'll talk about, the net metering program or the alternative on-bill credit mechanism. The revenue streams that help offset the debt service for the town to own this project, because despite whether or not there's additional contingency available, the town is still borrowing the money to pay for all of this. So there's 3 different revenue streams that we considered as part of this analysis that are available to solar projects. One is the avoided cost, and that's the actual avoided electricity and avoided delivered electricity that would otherwise come from Eversource to serve the building. The other, and that would be at the town's actual real avoided costs based on the tariff the building is on. The second is either net metering credits, which for those of you that are aware, is exactly what the Sunita Williams building is able to get to the extent they export any generation back to the utility, but 100% of the generation from the solar landfill project actually is net metered back to the town as a financial credit. So again, these are payments from Eversource for excess generation not consumed in this building, because in this case, we're backfeeding the meter, and instead sold to Eversource. And then finally, as you're all aware, the incentives available under the solar incentive program in Massachusetts, known as SMART, these are payments for 100% of the generation that is produced from the system. So regardless as to whether it's used in the building or it goes back to the utility, there's a payment that is made to the town for each of those kilowatt hours that are generated. And that is in general designed to sort of pay the customer, if you will, pay the town for the environmental attributes, because those, the old renewable energy certificates, those actually become the property of the utility. So for that, they have to pay for them. And that's defined by the SMART program and by the tariff itself. Okay. So I just wanted to sort of give you an overview of some of the assumptions and values that we used in this analysis. So for project cost, we looked at two different cost parameters. We looked at, on a conservative basis, we said about 3,000 per kilowatt DC, and on the high end, 35.50 per kilowatt DC. Just as a point of reference, I think Hank saw just under 2,500 per kilowatt DC for the Sunita Williams project. I think he would agree that that was a very low cost, very competitive, very low. And if we're able to get that here, that would be terrific. But we intentionally projected to be conservative to ensure that we were accounting for all the potential costs. We also built in, because we're contemplating now building this project under a Chapter 149 procurement, that we would do design in advance. There's several key reasons why we'd want to do that, but do some design and engineering in advance and prepare the system to go out to bid for the lowest competitive procurement and installation. We plugged $35,000, which we actually embedded in the borrowing costs. So it's being sort of financed over a 20-year period at various financing terms. But we think that's high. Steve can certainly talk about his conversations with Weston and Sampson, but we did allow for some other potential costs just in case. So there is contingency there. And then we accounted or allowed for sort of off the top legal and consulting costs to make sure that everything that is, and any costs associated with this entire transaction is covered. So I think from a cost perspective, we are certainly being conservative or to the high side. So we did two cost cases. And then in terms of the borrowing rate, we did sort of a low, a high, and a conservative borrowing rate, as Steve said earlier. A low is what I think the town has potentially historically enjoyed, although Dave Davidson has indicated to us that borrowing rates are in fact increasing. The first piece of information he had given us and suggested we use 5.3%, and he said in this kind of difficult time it could go as high as 7.2%. So we did the analysis at all three borrowing rates with sort of a low, high, and a conservative. And then finally, we built into the model, into the pro forma, some annual operating costs, annual O&M, which is, again, not a significant cost for the project, but given the level of annual escalation on labor and annual O&M costs in general, Dave Davison recommended that we use 4.3% as an annual escalator. And as you can imagine, it not only escalates annually, but that's compounding year over year. And then our annual insurance costs that we projected, we escalated those at 5%. Dave had indicated that he expected a jump in insurance of about 8% from one year to the next. So I just increased the base and lowered the escalation rate a little. And then finally, for the SMART program, which is, as I mentioned, a tariff program, it's a declining block tariff. So the earlier you get SMART incentives, the more financially attractive they are, is the best way to to sort of characterize that. I assumed that we would be able to certify this project in capacity block 4. Right now we're in the tail end of block 3. If we can get into block 3, that would be great. There's more money. But if we get into block 4, which is the analysis I did, my analysis reflects that level of incentive. The way the incentive structure is provided is there's a base incentive and then there's various adders. I use, again, conservative adders of the building mounted tranche and the public entity tranche, which are where they currently are and are likely to stay throughout the sort of the development process of this project. Some critical gating activities that I think are really important to talk about, and we'll get to the economics in a minute, but these are going to be some key financial drivers. Having the system designed and the equipment specified allows us early entrees into programs, specifically the SMART program, that results in a higher incentive level. Remember, I mentioned that it was a declining block program. Right now, the SMART program just went through its first major overhaul. The Department of Energy Resources published its SMART regulations, sort of SMART 2.0, I'm calling it. So the revisions to the SMART program on April 14th, 2020, and immediately suspended all new applications. So there's no one else competing against us yet. But effective May 18th of 2020, the gates will open and everyone who has projects ready to be certified will be applying for that certification. So to prepare us for that, having a full system design and equipment specified will allow us to specify the project in the SMART program when we're able to. It doesn't commit the town, it just locks in the incentives going forward. The town can always withdraw the application. In addition to that, having the system design and the equipment specified allows us to apply for interconnection with Eversource. And that interconnection process is a significant gating process to everything else in this program. And it's time consuming and it's really subject to the scheduling of Eversource. But without it, as Hank will attest to it, you cannot interconnect your asset into the grid, no matter how it's metered. And so that's another key benefit. And then I think the last two pieces are the last one is obvious, developing procurement documents, but to the extent the town decides it wants to apply for net metering, we will have to, because of the landfill project and because the two parcels of land are being joined together, we would have to apply to the Department of Public Utilities for an exception to the single parcel rule for net metering. We won't be able to do that until we have a project to apply for. So we would need to, again, know what the design of the system is and the equipment specification. In terms of the financial analysis, clearly the system design will inform the analysis. If the system's a little bigger than what I have in the analysis, the economics will change a little. System's a little smaller, the economics are going to change. The final disposition on utility interconnection cost, I have some assumptions built into my cost model, and which block we get into under the SMART program and whether or not we decide to take the net metering route, and if we get an exception, will really inform the analysis and move the numbers around a little. Once we have all of the information necessary, so I think where we are now is a good proxy for what we're likely to see, but many of these other pieces, real data is going to be important in order to finalize the analysis. But we would refresh the analysis, present it to you folks, to town manager and to the select board for approval, and then conduct a public procurement process for turnkey procurement and installation, assuming we're moving forward. So this is, Steve's is much more involved. You probably have a lot of questions for Steve on the last slide, but as you can see, the front end system design and specification really is a driver to all of these different touch points of what makes the project move forward and on what milestones, and when things are approved and when those incentives are locked in. But for the most part, if we're able to have a design and equipment specified, and with the support of the town, this project could apply for SMART certification once the application portal opens up again in May. And that once that SMART certification and the incentives are defined, a preliminary statement of qualification is established, and the town, for lack of a for a general time frame, really has 18 to 24 months to get the asset built before there's any risk in losing those incentives. So some additional assumptions just to go over. Again, as I mentioned, the SMART Program 2.0 regulations were filed on 4/14. They went into effect. They actually added a 6-month extension to timeframes, but the final regulations are expected to be promulgated within 90 days, which is standard practice. I parenthetically wanted to point out that I guess it's COVID-19 depending on what's happening at the state level. Right now, those regulations have been filed with the, they've been filed with A&F. So they're in effect, and again, they'll be promulgated in 90 days. There is a public hearing scheduled for May 22nd, where the Department of Energy Resources will field questions to the regulations. I'd like to point out that about a year and a quarter ago, DOER filed what's called was a straw proposal, where they laid out all the changes they were anticipating making to the SMART program. There was a year of discovery with all stakeholders, which led to some changes in the design in the emergency regulations that were filed. Some of them came as a really big surprise to all of us. One that actually, I think, impacts this project more significantly. And that really relates to the difference between net metering credits and alternative on-bill credits. So net metering has historically been the mechanism by which any kilowatt hour that's sent to the utility is compensated. So if you export a kilowatt hour, the utility has to buy it, and they have to pay you at basically a tariff rate. The issue with net metering is it's a function of state law. So every time there's different capacities for each of the utilities for net metering. Every time one utility would hit its cap, there would be an instant appeal to the legislature to increase the caps. And so what we were seeing is this crazy ebb and flow of net metering being available, and then net metering being oversubscribed. Right now, the only place in this Commonwealth where net metering is even available is in NSTAR service territory, Eversource NSTAR service territory. Nowhere in National Grid, Western Mass, Eversource is the only service territory in the East that has net metering. The legislature has indicated they're exhausted with this issue, and as part of the SMART program regulations, they directed the Department of Energy Resources to generally make this problem go away. So in the straw proposal, this DOER provided a series of formulas that would allow us to understand what the value of the SMART incentive was going to be and how they address net metering versus alternative, this new concept of alternative on-bill credits. In the final emergency regulations, they changed all the formulas, which almost didn't make any sense. And after many conversations with a lot of very smart people and attorneys, my conclusion is they are pushing the industry away from net metering because of this issue with the legislature, and pushing toward alternative on-bill credits. So some of the early on analysis that I did, and by early on I mean like last week, my recommendation would be, let's go for an exception and do some net metering. But after the emergency regulations came out, my recommendation is just the opposite. So you'll see in a minute the difference between the two. But again, it's, for the most part, it is compensation for kilowatt hours that are sent to the utility. Net metering is virtually a retail rate. It approximates a full retail rate. Alternative on-bill credits is just the utility supply cost, so it's lower. Okay. Oops, sorry. Some other assumptions, again, if under the SMART calculation, just to give you a sense of how the SMART calculation works, if we are looking to net meter the exported energy, and if you remember, I said earlier that we're exporting to the utility 94% of that which the solar array generates. So most of the compensation, in addition to the SMART incentive, most of the compensation is for the electricity we're selling back to the utility. The calculation for the SMART incentive, if we're net metering, is the overall gross incentive. So this combination of base and adders is reduced by the full net metered rate, resulting in a lower SMART incentive. And you'll see those numbers. If we're not net metering and instead taking alternative on-bill credits, you have this overall gross incentive that's reduced by this proxy value, this formula that DOER came up with, that in effect is much less than half of the net metered rate, which results in a higher SMART incentive. And again, if you recall, you're going to get 100% of the generation is compensated at the SMART incentive rate, plus anything you send to the utility is compensated for the energy at either net metered or alternative on-bill credits. So again, my assumption is DOER is pushing the industry away from net metering because it's a lightning rod at the legislature. So we did, as I mentioned, a couple of different scenarios. Actually, we did 8 scenarios. And there are 3 scenarios that we're going to run through tonight. One is sort of best case, 300 per kW DC, which we think is a reasonable conservative cost at a 3% borrowing rate, which I think Dave would tell us is probably not likely what he's to see if he borrowed today. And you can see here, under the published SMART 2.0 program, if we go down the net metering route, you can see the 25-year benefit from solar PV for net metering. And if we go down the alternative on-bill credit route, you can see the 25-year benefit with alternative on-bill credits. So net, you're looking at $300,000 to $359,000 inclusive of any debt service. So that's already been reduced. So we've got project costs over 25 years, project revenues and savings over 25 years for a difference, as you can see, of a positive benefit, in the $300,000 to $360,000 range for this for this best case scenario. Worst case scenario. This is 3,350 per kW DC, which we think is high, at 7.2% borrowing rate. Under that scenario, and again, I've made very conservative assumptions as to how energy is going to escalate over time. I did 1% per year compounded on all of these models. So it is conservative. Again, I'd rather have, under project and have this over deliver. But under those scenarios, this is not an economically super project. As you can see, it's your costs are greater than your benefits under all scenarios. And then, that's supposed to be scenario 3, not scenario 2, sorry. The conservative case is 3,000 per kW DC at 5.3% borrowing rate. So a cost that we think is reasonable and doable. Again, Sunita Williams was just under 2,500. If we can do, again, through a competitive process with a really well done design and have that whole engineering piece done at 5.3% borrowing rate, it still remains a viable and a good project with benefits, particularly if we take the route that I'm suggesting we do, of about $203,000 over the 25 years. or as low as 150,000. Again, you know, your objective to do this project certainly has, it does have, you know, a key component is cost, but there's also the environmental benefits of investing in renewable generation and really hedging future energy costs. So Steve, I'm going to turn this over to you for you to talk through this bubble chart, which I think very well articulates all of these key touch points.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Beth. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, great. I'm going to pull this up on my own screen so I can see it a little differently. Okay, so on this chart, what I was trying to get at was the key ingredient of getting Weston and Sampson on board to make design documents for a period where the documents will be due July 1st of this year. And that will be the orange box. We've already gone through the single line diagram. We've done a basic array on the roof. We've gone through Beth's analysis. One of the next steps is to speak with the Board of Selectmen and get their feedback. But if PPBC approves this process, we'll hire Weston and Sampson, and I'll introduce Weston and Sampson in a few minutes to talk about their fee proposal if they're available. And they would design the single line diagram, but the full procurement package. And we discussed why that's important, because we're going to go through the design build process through the 149 method. And that would take us to an award contract in February of 2021. But from that, obtaining those design documents on July 1st would take us down 4 paths. One is the design build process build process that I just described. But we're going to also go to Eversource with a package, an application, where we say to them, we want to have solar. And they screen us. The application takes 10 days. The screening process takes 65 days. The impact study takes 135 days. And this takes us to February 2nd. The other set of drawings in a application has to go to the SMART program. And this is where we would pursue the alternative on-bill credits, such as Beth was talking about. And this is the baseline credits that we're phasing into that was recently changed. And this brings us, this application process takes us to December 1st. Not as extensive as the utility, but, and then we were leaning towards the gray boxes on the right, which we were talking about the net metering. That's become less advantageous than we thought before. On my chart, I said more advantageous when I made the chart, but that subsequently has become less advantageous. And if we did pursue that, we'd get the waiver for the landfill piece, and we would see what those rates are, and that would take us to March 1st. But the path here is to get the project awarded around February 2nd, and then we can get into purchasing the materials with the contractor on board, and that would get us into a summer construction phase. So that's basically what that chart's about. So part of the equation of today is to bring on the engineer, and the engineer is Weston and Sampson. So maybe I can ask Mike Richard, are you available? Mike, can you hear me?
Yes, sorry, Steve. Yes, I
No
can.
problem.
I don't know if Steve Ware is on the call, if he's able to.
He is.
If he's able to assist with any questions.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm here. And
I saw him there briefly. How you doing, Steve?
Very good tonight. How is everyone? And Beth, what a
Good.
wonderful explanation of the program.
Thanks,
Do
Steve.
you have any comments to add here to this presentation?
I don't. Again, Weston and Sampson, having been involved early on in the feasibility study prior to the construction of this building, had planned for solar. And so we believe that the engineering design that would give us a set of plans and performance specifications could be tailored to what the town needs and wants, and put it out in a 149 format to get the lowest possible cost for the installation, and make those numbers hopefully look better.
Great. Okay. Well, I think that's basically the presentation if we want to open it for questions.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump in. So thanks very much for the presentation. I have some questions because I think we need to back up, and once everybody's level set, I think it goes into the question. I think first one is, we're just asking for $1,000 at this point. Is that correct, Steve?
The design, yeah, 10,500, yeah.
10,500, okay, fine. Can we go back to the very beginning, Beth, on your slide? I just want to replay what I heard and if I'm thinking right. So I got thrown off when I was looking up right here. This is perfect. So if the building's going to consume 14,800, that's correct, right? The building would consume electricity of 14,800. Is that correct statement?
That's our estimate now.
Fair enough. So the estimated solar generation consumed by the building. So the solar will generate 88% of the 14,800?
Yes, because if you think about it at night, when the building needs electricity, lighting, and
right. Got it. And then the estimated total solar generation not used in the building is 94%. That really threw me off. I wasn't sure how to interpret that piece.
Because 6% of the total requirements, the 14.8, we're saying 88% of that's going to be met by solar, and the other 12% is going to be bought from Eversource, right? And those numbers may be off one way or another, but approximately. But of the total 216,000 kilowatt hours that are generated, 94% of that is being basically gone through the building and out to Eversource. So the building is gobbling up 6% of it, and the rest of it's being exported. So
that threw me off if the solar is only covering 88%, right? Because it's the nighttime that you got to make up, right?
Two different denominators.
Yeah.
So if the building is using very little energy, apparently.
Right, but the 94%, 88%, the two differences it threw me off. I got the 88%. I just didn't get this 94%.
But 88% of the building requirements is being served by solar.
Right, understand that part.
But of the solar that's generated, the building's only consuming 6% of the total solar that's generated.
Got it. Okay, now I reversed it. All right, fair enough. Great.
Yeah.
Those are, I couldn't get that baseline in my head. I got it now. So does anybody else have any questions about the baseline before I'm going to suggest we go back to the bubble chart? Any hands raised or anybody want any group chat questions? I don't see any. So, okay, let's go to the timeline here. Bubble chart or the rectangle chart. I mean, it makes sense to me that this design really is really triggering 4 different tracks that then need to come together.
And what shows here is, depending on how those tracks come out, we have the ability to stop or proceed with the project. Once we get through the bidding process, we'll know what the unit cost is. Once we go through the utility interconnection, we'll know whether the costs associated with that interconnection exceed the assumptions and whether we still are in a positive value for the rate of return on the project. Likewise, with the SMART program, each one of those factors into a go, no-go situation further down the line.
Okay. George, I see your hand is raised.
Yes. I have a question regarding the assumptions, the financing assumptions. You showed 3 cases, a 3%, 7.5%, and then the conservative one in the middle. The first 2, the 3% and the 5.5%, whatever the number was, both seem that the project is a viable project. In this day and age where we have almost zero interest rates. Dave is still assuming that that might be a borrowing cost of 7.5%. I find that hard to believe at this point. I mean, I trust Dave, of course, but I know he tends to be very conservative. Any comments on that, Beth?
I defer to Dave on this. I honestly don't know. I think there was something about inventory and.
I think the bond rating, George, is now being factored into the liability of the lender, of the lendee, the person getting the money. The town has financial. All entities have revenue issues that are going to lower their bond rating. And I think that is what, I think things are changing.
Yeah, they're looking, what he indicated is that the bond market is looking at municipalities, even though they might have been AAA before, having greater difficulty to repay those bonds and potentially more defaults, and that increases the borrowing rate.
In general, I agree with that nationally. I don't necessarily agree with it regarding a town like Needham. It gives me, I just find it very, very conservative to even look at a 7.2%. But
well, and my guess is, you know, the town might end up issuing shorter term bands and refinancing them as some of your debt gets consolidated if the market improves and there's a lower rate. But
okay, well, certainly with that number, I wouldn't hesitate to move forward, because I think it's going to be a lot closer to something between 3 and 5%. But in any event, I certainly want to defer to him, obviously. But I had that question. It should be really directed to him.
The only other question I have, unless somebody else wants to jump in, I just was wondering about the economic environment and any of the current situation that could affect it. I know you talked about the legislature and approvals, but could there be anything further on the electric companies that say, look, we can't, you know, take this on, or they may lower rates? I mean, probably they'd never lower rates, but who knows? You know, demand, the economy goes down, they may be forced to do it. Is there any economic, geopolitical, whatever you want to call it, factors that could affect our assumptions here beyond what you've talked?
I would say there is potentially going to be a turnaround incentive program for alternative energy sources coming within the next year. That it's very likely that as the federal and state governments try to work out of the current economic malaise, that having a shovel-ready project may be advantageous. Now, I can't predict the future, but I've seen it happen before.
Yeah, and I concur with Hank. I mean, there's discussion of, if you remember in 2008, there was the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. There was a whole focus on renewable. Again, it was a different administration, but a whole renewable and energy efficiency track of really putting money into shovel-ready projects. I'll also say, you know, our Commonwealth is part of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. So we have greenhouse gas goals we have to meet. To the extent a lot of our traditional generation is natural gas, that doesn't help us much. With retiring nuclear power plants, believe it or not, they have low greenhouse gas emissions. So they actually help us meet those goals. We've got Pilgrim being decommissioned, a series of other decommissioned assets in the Northeast. In addition to that, there's an asset, as you know, it's natural gas, but there's an asset out by East Boston, the old Boston Edison power plant. That one's in threat of being decommissioned and shut down by Exelon. They said it's too expensive to operate. So, you know, to the extent we're also trying to manage capacity issues local renewable generation is helping to some extent. The big issue, to answer your question, is what is the impact of these programs on average costs to ratepayers, right? Because on our electricity costs, we layer on all the energy efficiency incentives, all the renewable generation incentives, so it raises average costs. And that's a big issue for the legislature and for the governor. But the direction that the state has taken with the SMART program was designed by mandate to keep average costs lower and to encourage a sustainable green jobs climate here in Massachusetts because it's good for the economy. So I would not expect to see the SMART program suspended. In fact, the first chunk of it went so fast, the industry was pushing to quadruple it, and the state in this emergency regulation just doubled it. So, I mean, they doubled it in the midst of the coronavirus. So I don't think that there's going to be any sort of retrenching from that.
Okay, great. Thanks. Anybody else have questions before I go to the topic of the money? Okay. So why don't we go to the cost, the 10,500, and maybe we just go back to the last slide where you have the sequence of events, and right there, yeah. So essentially, we're asking for 10,500 on the Weston Sampson design documents and to get them prepared for July 1. Is that correct, Steve and Beth?
That's correct, Stuart.
Okay. And where would these monies come from?
At this
Contingency.
right.
Okay, I just want to clarify. So from the contingency, we would be using those funds to fund the design documents. And is there any discussion from the committee relative to that ask? Okay. I think with that, the question is, do we need to vote to propose that at this point in time?
Well, I am proposing a PSS number 5 for the 10,500.
Okay, so you just need a preliminary okay at this point, and then you'll present the PSS at another meeting.
No, Stuart, we are voting to accept it.
Yeah, I have it in the package somewhere. I've submitted it in the package as a PSS fee proposal from Weston and Sampson.
Okay, hold on a second. I've got, fair enough. Okay, it's the second voting item. Okay, fine. So let me close this conversation down for the purpose of the committee. Is there any final questions asked or anything else? And then what I'd like to do is close this down and go to the 3 voting items we have.
I have just one more. It's more of a, maybe you could call it a political question. So we're evaluating whether or not we want to consider spending about $500,000 on this project at some point in time. And we have told the select board that we're looking into this and that we would get back to them. I think very soon is the time to mention to them what we're doing. I don't think anyone would have a problem with us authorizing the funds that we're talking about tonight. But I think somehow we need to let them know that we're moving down this path and what the gates are along the way. And the other concern I have regarding that is, and that's why I wanted to talk to them about it, or have someone talk to them about it, is that I'm not sure the town is, how good financial condition the town is in, and whether or not they would want to spend $500,000 on a project like this even a year from now. So they might say, gee, we'd rather have that money rescinded back to the town than to pursue this project at this time because of the current circumstances. I think it's a good idea to talk to the select board about that as soon as possible, but I still think it's a good idea to proceed forward in parallel with that.
Fair enough. And Steve and I spoke at the end of last week, Steve Popper and I talked to Mo Handel. So there's going to be a chairs meeting next week, George. And based on the discussion tonight and learning this and getting the feedback from the committee, we would carry the discussion to that chairs meeting and bring awareness to it. I think as long as we've got the pieces here, we should have everything I think we need to share. My sense, George, is that everybody is in favor of spending the $10,005, which would get us a lot more insight. And then in parallel, talking to the select board and the relative parties about going beyond that. That's fair.
Okay.
Okay, great. All right then. I see no more questions at this point, so I'm going to bring to the attention of the committee 3 voting items. We'll take the first one, which is the 10,500, and Catherine, it's the second one on the list that I have in front of me, the spreadsheet you sent me. So I'm going to put forth for the committee to approve PSS number 5 for solar design support services of 10,500. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Was that you, Erwin?
I think I might have beat George by a half a second.
I thought I heard it, but all right. So any questions? Hearing none, coming to the vote, I'm going to read the names because we need a voice vote. I'm going to go down the committee first and then the user group. First, Richard.
Aye.
George.
Aye.
Erwin.
Aye.
Natasha.
Aye.
Roy.
Aye.
Jean.
Aye.
Stewart's an aye, and I believe Rick, you're on the user committee, correct?
Yes. Aye.
Okay, great.
And John is also John Regan.
Okay, John.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, that's the first one. The second one is the Weston and Sampson February 2020 final invoice for $1,806.50. Putting forth to the committee for approval of that invoice. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
I hear Rick as a second. Any questions? Hearing none, coming to the vote. I will read the names. Richard.
Aye.
George.
Aye.
Erwin.
Aye.
Natasha.
Aye.
Roy.
Aye.
Jean.
Aye.
Stewart is an aye. Rick.
Aye.
John.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Last invoice is Beaver Construction change order number 8 for $3,333.96. Do I hear a second?
Second.
That's Richard. Any questions regarding the change order? Hearing none, coming to a vote. Richard.
Aye.
George.
Aye.
Erwin.
Aye.
Natasha.
Aye.
Roy.
Aye.
Jean.
Aye.
Stewart's an aye. Rick.
Aye.
John.
Aye.
Okay. That concludes the voting items and this topic for the Jock Cogswell building. Any last minute comments, Erwin?
Yeah, I just want to extend my thanks. I'm sure I speak for the committee on Beth's presentation. It was very well put together and really laid things out in a very clear manner. So I appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Great. Second that. Thank you. All right. Thanks everybody for Jack's Cogswell. And from the committee, we have a couple of other items we need to cover to wrap up this meeting. So thanks to everybody for the Central Ave Jack Cogswell building.
Thank you.
Discussion.
Thank you.
In terms of the committee, we have a couple of topics. One is the police, fire, and department. We have some invoices for that. Also like to get an update if possible, Steve, just on, I know the Carpenters Union and some of that. And the other item we need to talk about as a committee is just another meeting date in May, which we need to cover. There's a bunch of topics we got to cover, so I think it's easier to kind of unpack things and spread it over a little bit. So that's just the second topic. So the first bit, I don't know, maybe Steve, an update in terms of the police, fire department and what occurred last week, or an update?
Well, sure. Initially, the carpenters had gone out on March 6th, and we were looking at a May 4th restart date. I'm not sure that was March 6th, but we were looking at a May 4th restart date, some 5 weeks after the carpenters actually had gone out on strike. So they went out at the end of March, sorry. It turns out that the union had basically rethought their position, and the carpenters did come back to work last week. So it's essentially, they came back 2 weeks earlier than the May 4th restart date that we were looking at in terms of schedule implications. We are at the point now where construction had continued, but we were impacted by the lack of certain trades, carpenters in particular, which was affecting our critical path. And we were looking at a stretch out of the schedule for an additional 4 weeks. That, with the carpenters coming back, we've now brought back the schedule. We don't have the updated schedule from Consigli just yet, but I expect it to show a delay of about 2 weeks where we were running in terms of completion date, which would bring us sometimes towards the end of August and not into September. So construction continues to progress. Fire Station 2 was more directly impacted on critical path. So that is going to be assessed as well, but the carpenters are back there. There was not just a question of the carpenters coming back in terms of the union position, but also in terms of the personal positions on some of the trades, and we were having difficulty staffing certain elements, which affected Fire Station 2. Actually continues to affect Fire Station 2. But construction is progressing. We haven't stopped. We continue to plow forward. And so things are, much better than I had anticipated when the initial action with regard to trades cutting back had occurred.
Okay, great, thanks. And I thought it was important for the committee here because I was very pleased when I heard the carpentering union came back. But I think, Steve, what I would like to see in the next meeting is just a schedule update discussion, just on at the high level, given now that they're back and hopefully they stay, what is the real impact? And the second thing is obviously the change orders and a review of a deeper review of the anticipated call log, which we talked about last time to do. Is that?
That'll all take place in 2 weeks.
Great, okay, thanks.
Or, well, in 2 weeks if we change the date, or 3 weeks, we don't.
Right, we'll get to that, perfect. Okay, thanks for that.
Quick question.
Yeah, go ahead, George.
Steve, you had mentioned also that there was an issue with regard to the ceiling vendor or contractor, because they also had walked out. Have they come back as well?
K&K is on site, yes.
Okay, so we expect that they were off for what, a few weeks also?
They walked out about the same time as the carpenters did.
And came back about the same time?
Have come back about the same time as well.
Okay, so I'm assuming we'll experience some delays because they didn't get the grid work up there. That's what they're working on in Fire Station 1, right?
Correct. Yes.
So do we know how big an impact that is?
We're waiting for an updated schedule, but right now we're looking at the 2 weeks delay from where we were in the last update, which was at the beginning of March.
just a quick question with regard to that. If they walked out, has anyone discussed with them what they're going to do to make up the time so that they aren't in the way of hanging the lighting and hanging and putting in the drops for the fire protection system, et cetera? Are they responsible to make up that time? In other words, work more hours?
That is a good point. I don't think their particular action was as critical as the carpenters and may not have affected the critical path, but for sure we should not be on a critical path because
yeah, I'd like to get an answer to that, because I think I have a funny feeling that their work was holding up a lot of stuff, especially the lighting and the drops and so forth, because they don't have the grid work up. If they don't have the grid work up, the other guys can't work. The electrical guys can't work, and the plumbing guys can't work, etc. So I'm just curious. Someone ought to kind of lean on them. I expect Consigli would do that.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, so from a voting item perspective, we have a few items here. I'm going to combine a couple of them. And then we have one item for Sunita Williams. So bear with me here. Let me just go down through them. I'm going to put forth a invoice for the Motorola Solutions for the shipment of equipment for $1,109,420.40. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thanks, Natasha. Any questions?
Yes. Is that equipment that's been shipped to the site, or is that stored in a warehouse somewhere, or what's the?
Stored on town property.
Oh, it is here. Okay.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
it's within budget, correct?
And within budget, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, hearing none, coming to a vote. Richard?
Aye.
George?
Aye.
Irwin?
Aye.
Natasha?
Aye.
Roy?
Aye.
Dean?
Aye.
Stewart's an aye, and I don't believe we have a user group, but we should be okay with that. We have all 7. Okay. I am going to go to the next one, which is connectivity point for cabling for $2,019.16. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thanks, George. Any questions?
What project is this again?
This is the public safety complex.
Okay.
That cabling, just to speak to the cabling, this is Mike. That was the cabling that took place at Hillside for the phone system.
Okay, the temporary facility.
Correct.
All right. Thank you. Hearing, seeing no questions, coming to a vote. I will call Richard.
Aye.
George.
Aye.
Irwin.
Aye.
Natasha.
Aye.
Roy.
Aye.
Jean.
Aye.
Stewart's and I. Okay. I am going to put forth for approval the Milton Cat March 2020 generator rental for $2,612.50. I hear a second.
Second.
Thank you, Richard. Hearing a second. Any questions? Hearing, seeing none, all coming to a vote. Richard?
Aye.
George?
Aye.
Irwin?
Aye.
Natasha?
Aye.
Roy?
Aye.
Jean?
Aye.
Stewart's and I. Okay. I'm going to put forth 2 invoices for Rist Frost Shumway. One for their February 2020 services for $365. The second part is the March 2020 services for $3,531. Here a second.
Second.
Thanks, Irwin. Any questions? Hearing none, coming to a vote. Richard?
Aye.
George?
Aye.
Irwin?
Aye.
Natasha,
Aye.
Roy,
Aye.
Jean,
Aye.
Stewart's an aye. Okay. Put forth a invoice to approve Town of Needham Police Detail, March 17th, 18th, and 20th, 2020, for $1,040. Here a second.
Second.
Thanks, George. Any questions? Hearing, seeing none. Great. Coming to the vote. Richard,
Aye.
George,
Aye.
Erwin,
Aye.
Natasha,
Aye.
Roy,
Aye.
Jean,
Aye.
Stewart's an aye. Okay. Last two invoices for public safety. Invoice for UTS of Mass Dedham Tower Materials Testing, March 2020 for $165. And UTS Mass FS2 Materials Testing, March and April 2020 for $550. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you, Natasha. Any questions? Seeing, hearing none, coming to a vote. Richard,
Aye.
George,
Aye.
Erwin,
Aye.
Natasha,
Aye.
Roy,
Aye.
Jean,
Aye.
Stewart's an aye. Okay. Last invoice on the list is the Sunita Williams School, the intro systems, building management. I put forth the invoice for $1,125. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you, George. Any questions? Hearing, seeing none. Coming to a vote. Richard,
Aye.
George,
Aye.
Erwin,
Aye.
Natasha,
Aye.
Roy,
Aye.
Jean.
Aye.
Stewart's an aye. Okay. All right. That's for the voting items tonight. That closes out the voting items. And the last item to touch base on is the meeting schedule. As I referenced, we're only going to have one meeting in May. We had town meeting and a number of things, but I think with the there's enough project work going on right now, especially the fire and police and scheduling and stuff like that. It makes sense to have another meeting between now and the end of June. So if you really look at it, try to get 2 meetings in May and 2 meetings in June, or some distribution there. I don't know the best way to look at people's schedule, but I think we're all probably pretty locked down in our houses. And do you have openness? I guess I was proposing Memorial Day, which wasn't the right move, which is May 25th when I looked at the schedule. But I don't think that makes sense. I don't know, Steve or Catherine, would you have any recommendations in terms of the scheduling that you guys looked at?
Well, we took the lead that if we met in 2 weeks, which is the 11th, and then 2 weeks hence would have been Memorial Day, the option would be to meet on Tuesday. My guess is we're still going to meet remotely and meet on the, was it 26th, I guess it is.
Yes.
So I'd propose, and that would fall in line with the June meeting, I believe, Catherine.
Doesn't that put the June meeting, first June meeting 1 week later?
Well, if we change the June meetings to change it from 3 to 2, and then the June meetings would be the 8th and the 22nd instead of the 1st, the 15th, and the 29th.
Okay, I'd suggest that, Stuart, why don't you just work that out with Steve and send us a list and see if there's any objection.
Okay, but is there any, at this point in time, with anybody's schedules, or any dates along that month of May and June that's an issue for any of you?
No problem.
Okay.
So Stuart, what you're trying to say, or Steve, and Catherine, it's the 11th, the 26th of May, and then the 8th and the 22nd of June?
Yes.
Correct.
I'm just going to put it in my calendar for now.
Okay.
Sounds fine to me.
Okay,
I'd like somebody
great.
to set it up, though.
Okay, so then I'm going to suggest, Catherine, that we just send out that new schedule and put it in everybody's box tomorrow if we can, and just lock it down.
Okay.
And I haven't heard anything about town meeting. If any of you town meeting members, George or anybody, I haven't heard anything about how that's going to be handled.
Well, it was originally proposed to be moved till June.
As was the election.
Right,
Yeah, so that's the most we know at this point, right?
right. I think, I'm going to guess they're going to try to do it.
Remotely?
If it's the end of June, I'd be surprised if they don't try to do it.
In person or remotely?
I have no idea.
I think the state legislature has to pass an act that would allow towns to do it remotely. Right now, as I understand it, it is not allowed by law except in person.
Correct.
It's going to be tough.
Yep. All right,
That's-
just quickly on the dates again, Catherine, if you could.
Okay, so
You-
the new dates would be May 11th, May 26th, June 8th, and June 22nd.
Okay. So it could be the 22nd that could get affected by town meeting if possible. Okay, so let's go with that. Okay.
Stuart,
Great.
don't forget the minutes of the meeting.
Thank you, George. Thank you. Almost forgot that.
I haven't fallen asleep yet.
Yeah, I was writing those notes down and completely missed that because it's the top.
We're
Thank
just keeping you on your toes.
Yeah, you know, it's so much easier when you're not in the chair, isn't it, George?
Plus, this is the longest meeting in history. I'm only kidding. I'm only kidding.
What?
Whoa.
No way.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Wow. Boy,
It's
isn't it
my
fun?
turn. It's my turn to give grief to Stuart. He kept giving me grief all the time.
Exactly.
All right, goes with the territory.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, do I have a proposal for submitting?
I recommend we approve the minutes of the previous meeting.
Sorry, turn.
Second.
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 Wow, everybody's aggressive on that one. All right, I'm not sure who got it. It's either Erwin or Natasha.
Erwin can
Give it to
take
Natasha. Give it to
Erwin
Natasha.
can take it.
No, give it to Natasha.
Any questions? Hearing, seeing none. All coming to the vote. Richard?
Aye.
George?
Aye.
Erwin?
Aye.
Natasha?
Aye.
Roy?
I was not present at the meeting.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. God, I love you guys being right on the good sense of humor. And
I thought George was going to abstain.
yeah. Gene?
Aye.
I don't think you were there either, were you?
Yeah, he was there.
Oh, yes, you were. Thank you. All right, great. And Stuart and I. Okay. All right. What else have I forgotten? Anything else? Except for everybody being safe. All right, I think we're good for the meeting. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for hanging
Take
out.
care. Stay safe.
Good night.
Good job, Stuart.
Thanks.